Chelsea Hirschhorn is the founder and CEO of Frida, the brand that sells products for babies and parents. It started with one iconic item, the snot sucker or nose Frida. Hirschhorn was a bankruptcy attorney, then lawyer for the Miami Marlins. When she became a mom, she tried a strange little device that surprisingly worked. That experience changed everything. Hirschhorn bought the small business selling the device and grew it from a garage operation into a 150-product brand, designed for all of the messy and real moments of parenting. A 2025 CNBC Changemaker, Chelsea Hirschhorn is in the Changemakers and Power Players spotlight.
Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us on Changemakers and Power Players. I think I last saw you at our Changemakers Summit in LA in April. You were on stage. It was incredible. And the dinner afterwards was so much fun. So many spectacular women. But I've been familiar with your product for a lot longer. Your iconic product that started Frida is a product called the Nose Frida,
Yes.
which I first used. It is commonly known as a snot sucker
Oh, yes.
on my now 14-year-old son.
The grossest thing you'll ever love.
It's the grossest thing you'll ever love. I became obsessed with it. I now gift snot suckers to all my friends when they have babies. So why don't you explain what this snot sucker has spawned and how you got into the snot sucker business?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. So touched to be recognized in that way as a change maker. Never really thought of myself as a change maker, oddly enough, but really proud of the recognition. And yes, I have a very circuitous route to the baby world. Started with a snot sucker. Now fast forward almost 11 years. Over 150 products along the lines of infant health and wellness and feminine care, and really sort of built the brands in not such a dissimilar way than you received your first snot sucker and then sort of have continued to gift it. We like to think of the brand as the best friend that no one has, really.
So you were a bankruptcy attorney. You moved to Florida for your husband's job. How did you go from being a high-powered bankruptcy attorney to an entrepreneur in this space?
Well, yes, not necessarily with as much conviction, I would say, as I had when I graduated law school and entered the workforce. My husband had an amazing opportunity to come down to Miami and restructure the Burger King brand. And eventually, after 8 years there, took over as CMO of their North America business. And what was originally supposed to be a 2-year stint, for which I said, why not? I had filed some of the world's really largest bankruptcies as a first, second, and third year associate at a law firm after law school. Burnt out would be possibly an understatement. I used to eat dinner under my desk. And so when the opportunity came up to move, there was really no hesitation. And ultimately ended up working for the sports team in Miami, the Miami Marlins, to help them build out their non-baseball revenue department as an associate counsel. And then got pregnant with my first son, bought our first house on Miami Beach, and my neighbor left me the Nose Frida in my mailbox. And honestly, that same generosity of spirit, sort of the best friend that no one has, word of mom, as we call it, was a predicate for ultimately what the brand has become and so much of the brand DNA today.
So for our viewers and listeners who don't have a Nose Frida or an infant that they've sucked snot from, just explain how it works and how getting this gift made you leave your career and start this company.
Yes, I would describe myself generally up until that point as pretty risk averse, I would say. The Nose Frida was invented in Sweden by a pediatric ENT, and my neighbor was selling them originally out of her garage, ultimately, and was looking for someone to take over the business. Her kids were teenagers at the time. And I would say that, my career in sports had somewhat of a glass ceiling. I was never going to be the president of the team, nor was I qualified or interested in that path. And so I was really at an inflection point from a career perspective. I'm very ambitious, but coupled with sort of the slightly more conservative aversion to change and risk, it doesn't leave a lot of opportunity. Plus, I found myself outside of a core professional market, being sort of on the fringe in Miami. And so really at the encouragement of my husband, who ultimately is my number one champion and mentor, when she asked if I'd be interested in buying the business from her, it wasn't until I actually used the product, which is, you know, if you're not familiar, a nasal oral aspirator. You literally put the tip of the product to the baby's nose and you suck out the boogers. And
There is a sponge in
there's
between.
a filter. It doesn't go anywhere near your mouth. But it wasn't until sort of that moment that I used it, a few months actually after she gifted it to me, that I realized sort of I had to balance complacency as a parent with the status quo against this ambition that I had for more and better. And sort of on a paper napkin in her living room, bought the business, and the rest is history.
So I'm curious about this idea of being risk averse because you're very ambitious. You were also risk averse. How did you sort of convince yourself that it was the right thing to do to take on that risk? Like, how can one train oneself to become more of a risk taker?
I think you can. I think I needed a lot of encouragement, which I got from my husband. I also had to balance a lot of naysayers, people whose opinion I really value, like my parents, my extended family, who are just a little bit more traditional and conservative in that way. And I love them for it because ultimately it yielded a career track that was very fruitful for me in the beginning. But my parents grew up in their households when they were children in this post-depression era, sort of, you follow a very linear track. You become a doctor, a lawyer, an educator, whatever it was. And I think that looking back, not taking on that challenge would have been the greatest risk professionally for me, as ambitious as I was, because of that glass ceiling for women in sports. Obviously, a decade later, a lot has changed for women in sports, which is amazing. But at the time, that wasn't really the case. It was a boys' club. And so, those two feelings were at odds for me. Stay the path, stay the course, a very traditional career as a lawyer. And I think the catalyst for me that got me ultimately comfortable with the change was that my role at the Marlins was almost as an entrepreneur within the confines of a larger organization. So I had a little bit of a safety net, but I could dip my toe in the entrepreneurial waters. And once I did, it was kind of too late to turn back.
And so I'm curious with the idea of building this business that now has so many products on this one product that was the original product. And you really leaned into the grossness of it to market it. How did you realize, I should say, that it was going to be challenging or a totally different thing to be marketing something that's fundamentally kind of has an ick factor like a snot sucker when you got into this?
Unequivocally, no. I did not realize it when I started out, but it felt very natural and obvious to me. And what I mean by that is my parenting journey started at a time probably not so dissimilar to yours, honestly, when social media platforms and other disruptive media channels were portraying this picture-perfect parenthood that stood in stark contrast to the realities that I was experiencing on the front lines. 2 a.m, sort of feeding, grooming, navigating the normal challenges of the first year as a mom. And so couple that with the fact that in parallel, my husband was building through the Burger King brand and leveraging a few of the insights on how to convene and storytell around culturally relevant experiences. I really harnessed a lot of the truth-telling and the authenticity that I was craving into building the brand and ultimately sort of the archetype of who we were for parents and in particular, ultimately women when we launched the FemCare brand.
So, yeah, and I want to talk more about the expansion into the women's care. But to me, what's so fascinating is this idea that you marketed based on the opposite of the Instagram perfection, on the harsh realities of the bodily fluids. And it seems like that has done an incredibly great job of getting your products out into the world. But were there hard moments around that? I mean, Tell us some of the challenges.
Countless, like truly countless. And I wasn't necessarily expecting some of those challenges and roadblocks. And I mean that both in an algorithmic sense, right? Like we couldn't use the word vagina on billboards in New York City. Algorithms would block and censor certain parts of the body. Retailers were reticent to accept packaging that infused a sense of authenticity and storytelling and relatability and education. When you have 7 seconds in front of a consumer at the shelf to explain to them what this product does, you have to tell it to them straight. And so there were several challenges. I mean, all the way through launching the first ever commercial on national television that showed a breastfeeding woman during the Golden Globes. Countless rejection and challenge that we ultimately leveraged and harnessed in our favor to galvanize momentum and an inertia that ultimately I think we've unpacked and lifted the veil on 11 years in. It was slow. It was not fast. And I think, a lot of founders are celebrated for going fast and breaking things in that way. And I would say we were a little bit more measured.
So explain to me how one can take something that's a challenge and just fundamentally really risk slowing you down and turning it into really a marketing opportunity. And I wonder if those times when you had like commercials rejected or billboards rejected, you were like, wait a second, this time we're not going to just say, okay, fine, let's move on to the next. This time we're going to go big with this.
I would say we didn't necessarily do it right off the bat. The rejection mounted at a fairly measured pace. And it was only after the amalgamation of a series of rejections that we finally felt the courage and the conviction to move through it. And it was almost the absurdity of what was starting to be almost, outright analogized to other forms of advertising or forms of content that were justifiably and understandably censored or restricted, that I think the team and I felt the conviction, but more importantly, the responsibility to unearth the fact that this was happening. And it really, I think, started with the rejection from the Oscars commercial when we tried to air a 30-second spot during what is otherwise a women's Super Bowl, right? So we thought a lot of female eyeballs. We had just launched the postpartum feminine care line. What better way to drive awareness? And they analogized the products and the advertising, the content ultimately, to otherwise restricted categories of advertising during that broadcast, like sexuality, politics, violence in writing. And they had no qualms with sort of making those comparisons. And almost out of last resort, we told the story on YouTube. And we just added an introductory sort of image that what you're about to see is not lewd, is not indecent. It's just the story of a woman coming home, trying to do something as mundane as go to the bathroom after she's given birth. And there was no nudity. It wasn't shock for shock value. It was really in an effort to educate and prepare women. And I think overnight, it was like 8 million views.
That's crazy. So you've expanded so broadly, and you started first with not just the Nose Frida, but then into more baby products and now women's care products and then fertility products. What has been your strategy for this expansion?
Yeah, there was no grand plan for change in the beginning. The product line has honestly traced my own personal experience as a mother.
And now you have 4 kids.
4 kids.
12,
9, 7, and 3.5. I would keep going, but I'd have to find another husband. So the product line really has been a reflection of my own parenting pain points along the way and continues to grow with me, and likewise our consumers who have grown up with me as parents, to tap into what has otherwise been a veiled part of parenthood. Ones or topics or experiences that are taboo or were sort of previously table stakes as far as what had to be done as a parent, so you could get back to sort of the fun, more glamorous, Instagram-worthy version of parenthood. And we found a lot of motivation in sort of serving the parts and experiences of parenthood that required two hands and no phone in sight.
And a lot of these things are like ice packs for mastitis when you're breastfeeding. Tell us how you've decided which products you needed to do at what point.
So we started, of course, with infant health and wellness, really lifting the veil on the realities of caring for a newborn that no one prepares you for, right? Chapter 13 of What to Expect talks about packing your bag for the hospital, right? And I love the book, obviously, at the time, but it says to make sure you include a sandwich for your partner, right? Like, not necessarily top of mind for the modern day mom. And so we felt that after sort of the success that we had in the baby space and having developed meaningful relationships with retail partners and earning our way into meaningful distribution across the country and internationally, that we could tap into this mother care space, not knowing the challenges that would lie ahead, of course, on sort of advertising censorship and the like. But really, it was in service of my own personal experience giving birth to my second son and realizing that nothing had changed. And I didn't want to steal all the stuff from the hospital. I wanted better. I wanted to do what we had done for the baby space for women. And so it felt like a little bit of a departure from where the brand maybe was on a trajectory to go. But ultimately, reflecting back now 11 years in, it all ladders up to Frida being sort of the truth tellers about all facets of parenthood and prospective parenthood now with our conception support line.
Yeah, so conception report, now you're working fertility. How much of this is regulated by the FDA and how much does that complicate things?
It introduces a lot of complexity. We've taken an unorthodox approach to building a consumer products business, honestly. About 60% of our product line is regulated by the FDA. We've built a lot of capabilities around that component of the business. But I think our obsession with the consumer has led us to create a business that doesn't necessarily follow the traditional path that other consumer products businesses follow as far as types of products, category expertise, or depth in a singular supply chain. We instead have flipped that on its head and tried to support the consumer, the parent in this case, throughout a particular phase of life, a phase of life that is physically transformative and taxing and exhausting, sort of the effort to help them prepare for the unpreparable. And when you depart from the norm in that case, as far as, we're not a personal care only company. We're not a medical device company only. We're not a vitamin supplement company only. It introduces a significant level of complexity to the business model that we've had to navigate and build around.
And so I was surprised to hear you hadn't raised venture capital funding. So you bootstrapped from the beginning.
Bootstrapped.
And why did you decide not to raise VC? And how has that decision impacted how the company's grown?
Well, I think having taken it over from my neighbor, I approached the business building with a level of practicality and a measured pace, I think, that is not necessarily a reflection of a traditional founder. I think, as I said, founders tend to be celebrated for going fast and breaking things. And the approach that I was comfortable taking was a bit more measured. And I think that you can be rewarded from a business strategy perspective for actually building upon things as opposed to going quickly and breaking things. And at times, to be honest, when I was building the business starting in 2014, that bucked the prevailing trend at the time. A lot of peers and friends were on every cover of every magazine with unicorn valuations. And I felt, at times insecure or questioned that strategy. But I think ultimately it was a winning strategy for us because I wasn't comfortable introducing investor risk, introducing employee risk, building a team around that level of risk until I had a little bit more of a substantiation of what we were doing.
And so do you feel like the types of products you've introduced or the decisions you made to expand have happened either at a slower pace or you've gone in different directions because you didn't have those investor relationships to worry about?
I did take, partners at various stages of the business and always felt like a really great steward of those investments and partners. But what I love and really advise other founders now to try and find is that patient capital, that patient partnership.
Go
ahead.
Yeah, would you advise startup founders not to take capital? Do you think too many people want to take capital?
Yeah, I think that there's a time and a place to know when to bootstrap or to know when to invest in growth. Listen, if your working capital dynamic is such that you need inventory to service a really big account or a big opportunity for the business, it's a little different story, but I'd consider maybe a small business loan or other tools and tactics of business building that I think put a little less pressure on founders to focus on growth at all costs. That was just never our objective. And if we grew at a slower clip because of it, I was much more comfortable with that strategy. And I got to de-risk along the way. And I think ultimately, it was the right decision for us.
I'm curious what kind of a leader you are and also how your leadership style has changed. I mean, you came into this as a lawyer who, yes, is entrepreneurial within the Marlins, but you've done bankruptcy work. How did all of that experience shape your leadership approach when you started off? And now it's been over a decade. How have you changed as a leader?
I would describe my leadership style as empathic, transparent, informed by the stage of life that I'm in, which has obviously changed. Early on when my kids were younger and I was building the business, I was very focused on achieving certain milestones that I don't think would have been possible at my current stage of life, and really led with the expectation that other people sort of follow my lead as far as the rigor and the work ethic and the commitment. And I think that's evolved meaningfully over the last decade. Of course, it started with 2 employees. Now we have close to 200. And so the support that I have has been invaluable in building along the way. But the empathy that I have for the team's particular stage of life and investors' objectives, all the different stakeholders, the retailer dynamics, the macro factors that are either plaguing or driving momentum for certain, retailers in this day and age, I'm able to be a little bit more comprehensive in my understanding of different people's motivations than I think I was at an earlier stage of business building when my aperture was much narrower and I was sort of singularly focused on building the actual foundation of the business.
And so how has being a mother changed your leadership style? I mean, 4 kids. And you said each chapter of the business has been informed by each chapter of your life as a mom. But do you think you're leading differently as a mother?
I know that listen, I only have run the business as a mother, right? And so I know that my leadership style has been informed by motherhood, unquestionably. There are small things that we do, even within the 4 walls of the office, that are a reflection of the dynamics that mothers face and the trade-off and sacrifice of personal and professional ambitions and time management.
So like what?
Oh, where should I start? well, first of all, we do weekly manicures and haircuts for the team. Small detail, you might think like not that significant or meaningful, but it was a reflection of my commitment to myself and the team to minimize the trade-offs. I felt like I was always sacrificing and making a trade-off as a young working mom, especially in the early days. And, it's easy from the outside to say a manicure is so luxurious, so relaxing, like go do that after work. Well, it's not. All I wanted to do was get home for bath time. And so it was actually my husband's idea. He said, why don't you just get it done at work? I was doing an appearance or whatever it was. I felt like that was an important thing. And I said, well, if I do it at work, I'm going to offer it to the whole team. And that was 8 years ago. And we still do it to this day. And so small things like that. But also, different tactics and tools that I've honed as a working mother have been really effective for me. I plan my personal life like I plan my business, really maniacally obsessive about my schedule, planning in advance, setting my personal goals for the year, both with my husband and for myself and for my kids. People laugh. I also have great help. I'm very fortunate. I didn't have it early on. I leaned into my network of friends and family very early on, but any working mother who sort of neglects to acknowledge the amount of help that they need to make it work, I think is misguided.
Yeah. So you mentioned your husband. About 8 years ago, your husband came to work for you.
Yeah.
What's that like, being your husband's boss?
Well, he's become a partner for sure in building a business and building a life together.
Was it his idea or your idea for him to come work for you?
It was my idea. I had to beg. And he had reached a level of professional accomplishment and impact in his own career, where I think without that, it would have been harder. I think that the milestones that he had achieved in his own professional journey were so fundamental to this partnership being successful and this dynamic and working relationship being successful, but also coupled with the fact that I was so obsessed with the brand that we were building. I was riding his coattails. He was basically moonlighting for me even before he took the job formally, which I think probably a lot of founders can relate to. But there's a level of trust that I was unable to tap into with any of the other marketers and brand storytellers up until that point. And I was able to really delegate and let go in a way that I don't know that I would have been able to with respect to some parts of the business that I hold so dear to me. Brand storytelling, consumer connection. And it allowed me to focus on other areas of the business that really needed my attention at the time. And now, we're full partners. He runs sort of one half, the commercial half, brand marketing, sales, and I run the rest.
Does it make it easier when you're organizing your life and work calendar? I mean, my husband and I do like a weekly sit down every weekend to go through our Google Calendar for the next week. And I can't imagine if we were also going through our work calendar.
Yeah, we have some hacks. We do a working lunch 3 times a week that sort of we carve out time to sit together and go through the business. So to the greatest extent possible, we're not doing that at home. Inevitably, we don't turn off, which is sort of the downside of having your business partner live with you. But it's great. I think it's a great example for my children, 3 of whom are boys, to see their father champion and support their mother's professional ambition and work alongside her to build something together. I don't take that responsibility lightly, raising 3 young men and sort of ushering them into the world that is, definitely a long ways away from being egalitarian as far as men and women are concerned.
You mentioned that when you were a lawyer, you felt burnout. Do you feel burnout now? Do you get burned out, or how do you avoid it?
I really don't feel universally burnt out. I think that there are seasons for me, but I avoid it kind of like I said, by being meticulous about planning my personal ambitions alongside my professional and making sure that I slot in. My biggest hack, honestly, is Jesse Itzler's big ass calendar, right? Like I stare at that thing every single day. I mean, this is sort of,
and that's a giant paper calendar.
For the whole year.
Yeah.
And my husband and I, every November, around the time of our anniversary, which is next week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We take we take a full day out of the week to go through our goals for the year. And it's business goals and it's personal goals.
So what's an example of a personal goal?
Investing more time to figure out our children's passions, right? So that was last year's. Spending more one-on-one time with them, which is really hard when you're a family of 6. Really dimensionalizing myself as a business leader beyond just sort of the work that I do for Frida day in and day out, but really sort of extrapolating myself outside of the 4 walls of the office as an advocate and ambassador for the brand. So those are just a short list.
It seems like a good strategy. Actually, Laura Modi, CEO of Bobby,
Love
at the
her.
end of every day, she sort of scores her day, both personally and professionally.
Oh my God,
It's
I
really
don't
cool
know
to
if I
see
could do
that.
it every day.
Do you have mentors? Who do you call when you're in a tough situation trying to figure out what to do, other than your husband?
I was just about to say, Eric, it depends on the inflection point. I've had great partners along the way and friends. I've learned to trust my intuition in a way that I never did before. And so my conviction and my intuition has become a compass for me. I think it's a flaw and a blessing at times.
Why is it a flaw?
Because I don't think that as a business leader and as a mother, you can do anything alone. I think that it behooves one to find someone or a variety of different people to be able to phone a friend in certain circumstances. Eric has definitely been that person for me, only because of his proximity to every facet of my life. There's almost like it's sort of like a faster ramp up in the explanation of the context behind the decision point that we're at. But I turn to my own intuition a lot, and have gotten very comfortable relying on that for a lot of decisions.
A number of female change makers who I've interviewed have talked about learning to trust their intuition. What would your advice be to someone who wants to get better at listening to their intuition?
Oh, I think balancing your intuition with validation points along the way and taking stock of when your intuition has generated or allowed you to post a win is really important to substantiate continuing to rely on it. I never took stock, I still don't to this day actually, enough of all of the accomplishments and mile markers that we've hit because of the conviction that I had, right? Like even starting the business and leaving a much more structured career path. I never really take a moment to reflect on that decision that was coupled with intuition and advice, right, that I got. And I think if I would do that more consistently to really understand where the wins have come from and balancing sort of consensus and looking for consensus from other people with your own conviction, I think that that's sort of the best advice that I could give.
Yeah. And then in terms of data, though, when you're launching a new product, like I heard you invented a toothbrush for toddlers. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You should be able to brush your toddler's teeth the way you brush it with like a dog's toothbrush, a pet toothbrush. But like, were you data driven when you're coming up with these things?
Not at all. Actually, to a fault, really. On the product side, data is a substantiation of our conviction and our intuition. We never lead with data. I mean, the only data that I feel comfortable leading with is that women's healthcare is going to be a $60 billion industry and less than 4% of R&D funding goes to those topics. So have a high level of conviction in where we're going. But, you know, the best example is creating the mother care category, really. There was no retailer data I could buy that could substantiate an investment of that magnitude. The category didn't exist, right? It was either steal your products from the hospital or navigate a very broken shopping experience to try and prepare for postpartum recovery. If I had led with trying to find the data, we would have never innovated.
That's incredible. This idea you have to sort of create the product to get the data.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time, but I'm going to end on a question, not on the massive scale of this category, but what you think your superpower is. You've talked about how meticulous you are with planning, how you've evolved to become more of a risk taker. Looking back at this past decade plus of growing Frida, really building the category, what's your superpower as a leader?
I think definitely a level of organization and thoughtfulness before diving headfirst in. I think the sort of measured pace and comfort with bucking the trend really has been a consistent thread in my story, either on the business building side or sort of on the brand storytelling side, being comfortable with lifting the veil and being a truth teller in that way and not worrying about what other people think.
Not worried about talking about the snot and the snot sucking.
It doesn't always work, but when it does, it's impactful.
Yeah. Well, perfect note to end on. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.